I was 8 years old the first time I scanned a crowd for my mother's face and found only emptiness. It was my debut in the third-grade winter play at school. Peeking from behind the heavy stage curtain, heart thumping with excitement and nerves, I searched for her silhouette among the parents flooding the auditorium. Other moms and dads were finding seats waving to their kids on stage, but the seat where my mother promised she'd be was unoccupied, an island of emptiness amid a sea of proud families. When the lights dimmed and the curtain rose, a lump tightened in my throat. I still clung to a fragile hope that she was just late, that any moment the door would creak open and she'd slip in with an apologetic wave. But as the music began and we stepped into the spotlight, that hope sank like a stone. I recited my lines on autopilot, my gaze drifting again and again to that empty seat in the third row. It almost glowed in its vacancy, a glaring reminder that I was performing for no one who mattered to me. After the final bow applause rained down and parents rushed forward with flowers and hugs, except mine, I stood at the edge of the stage, tiny and alone, blinking under the harsh lights as reality set in. Mom hadn't shown up. Backstage, my teacher, Mrs. Thompson, knelt beside me and pressed a single rose into my hand from the class bouquet. "You did so well," she whispered kindly. "I'm sure your mom will be proud when you tell her all about it." I nodded mutely and clutched that rose like a lifeline. Around us, classmates tumbled into the arms of beaming parents, their laughter echoing. I pretended not to notice the pitying glances from a couple of nearby parents who knew my family. I swallowed the tightness in my throat and forced myself to stay composed. If I cried, it wouldn't change anything. My tears never did. That night, Dad tried to explain why Mom missed the play as he drove me home in our old sedan. He cleared his throat, eyes fixed on the road, and offered me a weak smile. "Your sister was having a little meltdown, you know how she gets," he murmured. "Mom had to calm her down." He said it as if that made everything okay. My sister Janie, 6 years older, had cracked a nail before her middle school winter dance and burst into hysterics. Mom dropped everything to comfort her, over a broken nail. I was too young to understand how absurd it was, but I knew it hurt. Sitting in the back seat in my fading princess costume, I ran my fingers over the rose's petals and wondered what I did to deserve coming second to a fingernail. The next morning, our kitchen brimmed with the smell of coffee and toast as sunlight slanted through the window. I sat quietly at the table, still hoping Mom might ask about the play she missed. Instead, I watched her fuss over Janie wrapping a Band-Aid around my sister's finger where the nail had cracked. "Does it still hurt, honey?" Mom cooed. Janie pouted, cradling her hand like it was a grave injury. I poked at my cereal, my appetite gone. Mom never even looked my way, except to scold me for dawdling. "No. I'm sorry I missed your play," not even a simple, "How did it go?" It was as if my big night had never happened. That was how it always was in our house. We lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Think white picket fences, weekend barbecues, neighbors who waved from their driveways. From the outside, we appeared to be a picture-perfect family. And my mother, Ellen, certainly looked the part of the devoted mom, always baking cookies for bake sales, leading the PTA, bragging to neighbors about her children. But her praise was reserved solely for one child. Janie was the center of her universe. Janie was the spitting image of Mom. Honey blonde hair, delicate features, and a bubbly confidence. She was a cheerleader, a pageant contestant, the social butterfly. Mom lived and breathed for every one of Janie's trivial dramas and triumphs. In Mom's eyes, Janie could do no wrong, and nothing was too small to celebrate or fret over. Even a chipped nail was an earth-shattering event. I, on the other hand, took after Dad, darker hair, quiet, bookish. I was the old soul, as Mom liked to say, the self-sufficient one. It was a label that felt like both a compliment and a dismissal, a convenient way to justify giving me less attention. After all, I was so mature for my age, so capable of handling myself. I didn't need fussing over. I would be fine. So while Mom chauffeured Janie to dance rehearsals and dress fittings, I learned to bike to the library on my own. While Mom helped Janie pick out jewelry for school dances, I taught myself how to braid my hair via library books. My accomplishments were quiet. Spelling bee wins straight A's, a sketch I drew that won a county fair ribbon. And they were often met with a distracted, "That's nice, dear." Mom would hang my certificate or art on the fridge for a week, then it would disappear into some drawer, replaced by yet another photo of Janie twirling in a sparkly costume. I can't recall exactly when I internalized the truth, but by the end of elementary school, I understood my place. I was the afterthought, the supporting character in my sister's spotlight. I hoped desperately that if I worked hard enough, if I shone brightly on my own, Mom might finally see me. I fantasized about it, her coming to one of my science fairs and boasting to her friends that I was her daughter, her beaming with pride at me for once. That hope was what kept me going, lighting a small, persistent flame in my chest. Yet each time I extended my hand for her, "Mom, will you come to my award ceremony?" Her absence snuffed that flame a little more. There was always something more important, and that something was always Janie. I remember once intentionally coloring outside the lines in a drawing. I made her just to see if she'd notice my frustration with the result. All I got was a distracted, very creative sweetie, without her eyes ever leaving the dress she was altering for my sister. These were the small cuts, the quiet hurts that accumulated over the years. At 6, I felt the first sting of being unseen. By 12, it was an ache I carried with me daily. I didn't yet know how deep that wound would go as I grew older. I had no inkling of the storm that was quietly gathering. A storm born of neglect that would eventually drive me to the brink of despair and ultimately into a quest for justice. But at that tender age, I still believed maybe if I became something extraordinary, Mom would finally turn her eyes toward me. Years passed, and with each passing year, my mother's absence at my milestones became almost routine. By the time I reached middle school, I tried to pretend it didn't hurt so much. I told myself I didn't need her applause or her presence, but deep down, every empty seat and every missed event was another weight added to my heart, and those weights were getting heavy. In 7th grade, I entered the district science fair. I had spent weeks in the garage after school working on my project, a homemade weather balloon experiment that I was ridiculously proud of. Dad helped me solder some wires, and my science teacher lent me some equipment. I remember the night before the big fair, I finally mustered the courage to ask Mom if she could come watch me present. I tried to sound casual, like it was no big deal. "You can come if you want," I mumbled while setting the table for dinner, my eyes fixed on the fork in my hand. I held my breath, hoping. Mom barely looked up from peeling potatoes. "When is it again?" she asked in a tone that already spelled disappointment. "Tomorrow after school at the community center," I answered quickly. Janie, now in high school, perked up at that moment to remind Mom that she needed help picking out a dress for her cheerleading banquet, which of course was also the next day. Mom clicked her tongue. "Oh, that's right, the banquet." She shot me an apologetic glance that felt rehearsed. "Honey, I'm not sure I can make it. I promised your sister I'd help her get ready." I nodded stiffly, pretending it was fine. Inside, I could feel something bitter begin to coil. Why did it always have to be her? Why was everything of mine automatically less important? I left the kitchen quietly fighting a surge of bitterness. The next afternoon at the science fair, I stood beside my project display in the bustling hall, heart-pinching each time the doors opened. A few neighbors wandered through, including our neighbor Mrs. Conway, who gave me an encouraging pat, but Mom never showed. Dad had taken off early from work to be there camera in hand, offering me encouraging winks from the audience. I won first place for my grade level that day. They called my name, and I walked up to the little stage to accept a blue ribbon and certificate. The applause washed over me warm and satisfying for a moment, yet as I glanced toward the back of the room, I felt only the familiar hollowness. Mom wasn't there to see it. On the drive home, Dad ruffled my hair and told me how proud he was. I stared out the window, clutching my ribbon, blinking back tears that I refused to let fall. When we pulled into the driveway, we found Mom and Janie just back from their shopping trip. Janie twirled on the front lawn in a new sequined gown, while Mom clapped, exclaiming how she'd steal the spotlight at the banquet that night. They barely noticed me until Dad cleared his throat and announced that I'd won first place at the fair. Mom paused, a garment bag over her arm. "Oh, that's nice, sweetie." "Congratulations," she said lightly. She didn't ask to see my project or the ribbon. Instead, she ushered Janie inside to fix her hair for the banquet. I remained outside as dusk settled, the blue ribbon crumpled in my fist, feeling completely invisible. That resolve I made to stop asking for her time didn't last long, because hope is a stubborn thing. Again and again, Mom found reasons to miss my moments. Even after Janie graduated and started community college, Mom remained constantly at her beck and call. When I delivered a speech at an honor society ceremony in 8th grade, Dad sat in the front row, cheering, but the seat beside him was empty. I smiled through it when a teacher asked if my mother was there, repeating the familiar excuse, she couldn't make it. I was so tired of saying those words. By the time I started high school, a quiet anger had settled alongside my hurt. I carried it everywhere, a chip on my shoulder hidden beneath honor roll certificates and forced smiles. Janie at 19 still commanded all of Mom's attention. If she needed help with laundry or had a meltdown over a boyfriend, Mom would drop everything to console her. Meanwhile, I handled my own life, driving myself to appointments, signing my own permission slips, doing whatever I had to do alone. One evening during my sophomore year, I came home bursting with news I had been selected as a finalist in a statewide essay competition. The winner would go to Washington, D.C. for an awards luncheon. It was a huge opportunity, and I was desperate for my mother to care. I found her in the living room, sorting fabric swatches for curtains, something she was helping Janie with for my sister's new apartment. I took a breath. "Mom," I said carefully, "I have something to tell you." I explained about the contest and the trip. For a moment, genuine delight lit up her eyes. "Oh, that's wonderful," she exclaimed, even giving me a quick hug. My heart soared. She was truly happy for me. I began to babble about how hard I'd worked on my essay, basking in her attention like a plant finally getting rain. But suddenly, the front door slammed, and Janie burst in sobbing about a fight with her boyfriend Trevor. In the blink of an eye, Mom dropped her hands from me and rushed to Janie. My achievement evaporated from the room, forgotten, as if I'd never spoken. I watched as once again my sister's drama took center stage. I tried to interject and remind Mom about my news, but Mom snapped that it wasn't a good time Janie needed her. That was the final straw. Something inside me cracked. I shouted that Janie was always upset and that Mom always dropped everything for her. Mom shot me a withering glare and told me not to take that tone, saying we'd discuss my little thing later. That did it. The achievement I'd been so proud of had just been dismissed as a thing. I felt a final thread of hope snap inside me. I fled upstairs and slammed my door so hard the walls shook. She never came to check on me that night. Of course not. She was busy with Janie. Alone in the darkness of my room, I finally released a scream into my pillow, letting out all the grief and rage. I cried for Dad, for myself, for everything I had lost. And in that agony, something hardened inside me like a protective shell around my heart. If I meant so little to her, then from that moment on, she meant nothing to me. I sat in the darkness for hours, headphones on to drown out the sounds of Mom comforting my sister downstairs. Beneath the anger was still that raw ache of longing. I'd still sometimes cry in frustration when no one was around. But I threw myself even more into my schoolwork, determined to escape this house and these feelings as soon as I graduated. Fate, however, wasn't done testing me yet. The worst was still to come, pushing me to a breaking point I never saw coming. After that night of the contest confrontation, something in me went quiet. I drifted through the days like a ghost. At home, I spoke to Mom or Janie only when absolutely necessary. We lived under the same roof as strangers. I spent most of my time holed up in my room with textbooks or music, anything to escape the silence between us. At dinner, I ate in wordless isolation while Mom and Janie chatted as if I weren't there. I might as well have been a boarder, not a daughter. Any hope that Mom would change died the night she dismissed my achievement as a thing. In its place grew a numb resolve to endure until graduation. I marked the days off like a prisoner counting down a sentence. At school, I mustered polite smiles, but inside, I felt hollow. Friends drifted away when I withdrew into myself. Teachers commented that I seemed quieter than usual. I told no one about the weight in my chest. How could I explain that my own mother didn't care about me? I carried that burden alone, letting it fester. Winter of my junior year, the unthinkable happened. Dad died. Even now, the memory hits me in the chest like a hammer. One cold, gray afternoon, it was just me and Dad at home. I was upstairs drafting college application essays, and Dad was down in his workshop tinkering with one of his DIY projects like he often did on weekends. Mom had driven over to Janie's apartment to help with some decorating. The house was peaceful until I heard a sudden heavy thud from downstairs. I rushed down to find Dad collapsed on the garage floor, the smell of sawdust and motor oil sharp in the air. He was clutching his chest, eyes shut tight in agony. Panic surged through me. I screamed for Mom even though I knew she wasn't home. My hands shook as I grabbed the phone and dialed 911, barely able to get the words out as I begged for an ambulance. "I'm here, Dad." "Hang on, please," I cried, pressing his hand. His fingers twitched, squeezing mine weakly. What felt like an eternity passed in mere minutes. The wail of sirens, paramedics rushing in, me climbing into the ambulance beside him with my heart in my throat. I realized I hadn't been able to reach Mom. My frantic calls went unanswered, her phone likely on silent while she shopped with Janie. At the hospital, I paced the hallway under harsh fluorescent lights for what felt like hours until a surgeon emerged. One look at his face and I knew. He quietly explained that Dad had suffered a massive heart attack. They did all they could. He was gone. I remember shaking my head over and over, whispering, "No, no," as if denial could reverse reality. When Mom and Janie finally arrived, I was standing against the wall, numb and pale. Mom took one look at me and burst into hysterical sobs, collapsing into Janie's arms. How could this happen? "Oh God, not my husband," she wailed. Janie cried too, holding her up. And me, I stood a few feet away, arms wrapped around myself, watching my mother cling to my sister as if she were the only thing left in the world. Not once did Mom reach for me, her other child, who had just lost her father too. Through the fog of my own grief, I had a bitter realization in that moment I had effectively lost both parents. One to death, and one to a chasm of emotional distance that suddenly felt unbridgeable. We made it through the funeral somehow. Neighbors and relatives filled the house with flowers and murmured condolences. I drifted through it all in a daze. As I stood beside Mom greeting guests, we barely exchanged a word. She was a statue of grief, leaning on Janie for comfort. I dutifully thanked people for coming and listened to them talk about what a good man my father was. That night, after the funeral, I crept out of my room, unable to sleep. I paused outside the living room when I heard murmuring. Mom and Janie were curled up on the couch amid half-empty wine glasses and sympathy cards, looking through an old wedding photo album. Hidden in the shadows of the hallway, I heard Mom's voice, raw from crying. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Janie. You're all I have now." Her words confirmed what I'd known all along. I had never truly been part of her heart. I turned away and slipped back to my room, quietly closing the door. Alone in the darkness, I finally let out the scream I'd been holding in, burying my face in a pillow to muffle the sound. I howled for Dad, for myself, for the childhood I never really got to have. In that solitary agony, I felt something inside me harden completely. If I was not all she had now, then she was nothing to me either. In the weeks after Dad's death, I drifted numbly through each day. At school, I was that girl who lost her father, and everyone's sympathy felt hollow. Mom and Janie became even more wrapped up in each other, leaving me truly alone with my thoughts. Late at night, when despair crept in, I wondered if I vanished, would anyone even notice? Those thoughts terrified me. Surprisingly, a lifeline came unexpectedly about a month after Dad's passing. One afternoon, I returned to an empty house to find a foil-covered casserole on the kitchen table, with a note in neat cursive, "For you, dear. Stay strong. Mrs. Conway." At the bottom, our neighbor had added, "Your father was so proud of you. He always talked about your achievements." I sank into a chair, tears filling my eyes. That simple gesture pierced my numbness. Someone saw me. Someone cared. I heated the casserole and ate alone that evening, each bite filled with both gratitude and sadness. Mrs. Conway's words echoed in my mind. Dad had been proud enough to brag about me. The thought lit a tiny spark in my darkness. That night, for the first time since Dad's death, I didn't cry myself to sleep. Rock bottom had nearly broken me, but a faint glimmer of hope was finally taking root. The tiny spark that Mrs. Conway's kindness lit in me began to grow. In the wake of so much loss, it gave me something to hold on to. I decided then that I would live for the people who actually cared. For my father's memory, for myself, and not for the mother who never did. If Mom had cast me aside, so be it. I was done chasing after her love. Instead, I'd chase my own future. That spring, as senior year approached its end, I threw myself into my goals with a vigor I hadn't felt in years. I studied harder than ever, not for Mom's approval, but for my own pride, and maybe a little to honor Dad. Late at night, I would whisper to the quiet walls of my room, "I'll make you proud, Dad. I promise." Sometimes I imagined he could hear me somehow. Around April, college acceptance letters began to roll in. Each afternoon, I'd check the mailbox with a mix of hope and nerves. One day, a thick envelope arrived from a prestigious university across the country. My top choice. Hands shaking, I ripped it open on the porch. I had not only been accepted, but awarded a full scholarship. I stared at the letter, reading the words over and over: full tuition. Outstanding academic merit. Welcome to the class. A laugh bubbled out of me, surprising in its freedom. I felt weightless. This was my ticket out, proof that all my hard work meant something. Clutching the acceptance packet to my chest, I glanced toward Mrs. Conway's house next door. She must have heard my squeal of delight because she appeared on her porch, eyebrows raised in question. I beamed and held up the envelope. She rushed over, and I excitedly told her the news. There on the front steps, Mrs. Conway pulled me into a hug. "Oh, your dad would be so proud, sweetheart," she said, eyes misty. I blinked back a tear and smiled. For once, these were tears of joy. That evening at dinner, I mustered the courage to share the news with Mom. She was serving pot roast while Janie chattered about some new decor for her apartment. My voice cut quietly through the chatter. I got a scholarship. A full ride to Stanford. I'll never forget Mom's face. Her fork paused mid-air. "Stanford? That's in California, isn't it? So far away." "Yes," I replied, my tone neutral. My heart pounded. I realized I'd been craving just a single enthusiastic congratulations, but Mom's brow furrowed. "Well," she said, "I suppose if that's what you want. It's a good school." Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "Congratulations." Janie piped up that they could visit me in California someday, and Mom immediately latched onto the idea, already planning a girls' trip out west. Just like that, my achievement was sidestepped. But this time, it didn't shatter me. I'd expected nothing, and I got nothing. The difference now was, I didn't need anything from her anymore. I had my future set and people in my corner who truly cared. That night, I hit accept on my Stanford admission without a second thought. Mom hadn't forbidden me from going, and frankly, even if she had, I would have gone anyway. The summer after I graduated near the top of my class, salutatorian in fact. During the ceremony, I delivered a speech right after the valedictorian. As I spoke about perseverance and self-belief, I spotted Mrs. Conway in the audience giving me a thumbs up. The seat next to her was empty. I had given my extra ticket to her, not to Mom. In truth, I hadn't even reminded Mom when graduation day was. She knew the date. It was on every calendar in the house. But the night before, she made no mention of it, too busy discussing wedding plans with Janie. My sister had gotten engaged over the summer. So I left that morning in my cap and gown without a word, and unsurprisingly, Mom never showed up at the ceremony. Maybe she didn't notice I was gone. Maybe she didn't care. Either way, the day was mine, and I refused to let her absence cast a shadow over it. Standing on that stage with my diploma in hand, I felt a rush of triumph. I'd made it through, in spite of everything. Dad wasn't there to see it, but I felt his presence in my heart. And somewhere in the crowd, a kind neighbor cheered loudly for me in his stead. After the ceremony, Mrs. Conway enveloped me in a proud embrace. She even snapped a photo of me in my cap and gown to send to her son, bragging that the girl next door is her honorary niece. That summer, I packed my life into 2 suitcases. On the morning of my departure for college, I stood in my bedroom for a long time, gazing at the walls that had witnessed my tears and dreams. I wondered if I should say goodbye to Mom or Janie. By then, Janie was deep into wedding preparations, and Mom's life revolved around that. They were out together at a bridal shop when I loaded my bags into a taxi. I left a note on the kitchen counter, polite and brief, gone to college, my name. I didn't expect a reaction, and I didn't get one. Later, Mrs. Conway told me Mom casually mentioned to the neighbors that I'd gone off to some school in California, as if it were a trivial detail. As the taxi pulled away from the only home I'd ever known, I didn't look back. I felt an incredible lightness, as if the house itself had been pressing down on me, and now that weight was gone. I caught sight of Mrs. Conway waving from her porch, and I waved back through the window. I knew then that I wasn't leaving home completely alone. I carried with me the love of those few who had truly seen me. I arrived in California with big ambitions and a heart determined to heal and harden in equal measure. College was a revelation, a chance to reinvent myself far from the whispers of my hometown and the shadow of my mother's neglect. In that sunny new world, nobody knew me as the girl whose mom never showed up. I was just myself, the bright scholarship student from the East Coast, and I flourished. Freed from the constant reminder of what I lacked, I poured myself into my studies and new experiences. In my dorm room at night, I'd sometimes stare at the ceiling and marvel that I had made it out. I promised myself I would never return to that stifling house, except on my own terms. The anger I held toward Mom cooled into a steely resolve. I didn't need revenge in the form of cruelty or confrontation. Life would take care of that in time. The best revenge, I decided, would be my success. One day, she would see what I had become without her, and it would sting. I didn't know exactly how or when, but I knew I would make it happen. That thought became like a distant star, guiding me forward on even the hardest days. College was only the beginning of my ascent. Free from my mother's shadow, I excelled in my studies and then pushed further. After graduation, I secured a competitive internship that turned into a full-time job in my field. Every goal I set for myself I met, not because anyone was watching, but because I was driven by the fire to prove, if only to myself, that I could succeed without the family who had abandoned me emotionally. In those years, contact with Mom and Janie was virtually non-existent. We became polite strangers. Occasionally, I'd get a short email from Mom on my birthday. Generic well wishes signed Love Mom. I never knew if she sent them out of obligation or guilt. I responded tersely, if at all. Janie and I drifted as well. She was busy building her own family. She'd married her boyfriend Trevor and had a baby on the way before I even finished grad school. I heard all this through the grapevine of our hometown, mostly via Mrs. Conway, who kept me updated whenever I called to check in on her. Mom never reached out to share the news of the wedding or pregnancy herself. I wasn't invited to the wedding, and truthfully, I was relieved. By that point, I had no desire to play the token sister at an event where I knew I'd feel unwelcome. Instead of family, I found support in friends and mentors I met along the way. My college advisor became a kind of father figure, encouraging my ambitions. Colleagues at my new job recognized my drive and talent. With each accomplishment, a promotion, an award at a professional conference, a published research paper, I felt that inner confidence grow. And somewhere in the back of my mind, the thought glinted. She would be eating her heart out if she knew. That thought wasn't bitter or despairing anymore. It was empowering. I didn't actively seek to hurt my mother, but I did want her to finally see my worth. From a distance, when it was far too late to claim any credit, I kept tabs on Mom and Janie, only sparingly. From what I gathered, Mom was perfectly content in the role she'd chosen, doting mother to the golden child, and now doting grandmother to Janie's little boy. They still lived in the same town, their lives deeply entwined. My existence was a footnote, if even that. It's funny how life can vindicate you when you least expect it. 7 years after I left home at age 25, I achieved something I never imagined back when I was that little girl scanning the audience for Mom. I had poured my heart into a groundbreaking project at work, one that gained national recognition. The details of the project don't matter as much as what came next. I was selected to receive a prestigious national award in my industry. It was the kind of honor people dream about, the kind that comes with a fancy gala, a spotlight on stage, and even a televised broadcast on a major news channel. When I got the official notification letter printed on heavy linen paper with an embossed gold seal, I sat in my tiny apartment and laughed aloud in triumph. This was the moment I had been waiting for, even if I hadn't consciously realized it. My work, was being honored on the national stage. And my mother, who had never cared to witness my little achievements, would now have to hear about this big one. I immediately dialed the first person I knew would rejoice, Mrs. Conway. By now she was in her 70s, but as sharp and supportive as ever. When I told her about the award, she whooped happily into the phone, making me grin ear to ear. "They're even broadcasting the ceremony on TV," I explained. "It'll be black tie, a really big deal." "Oh, honey, your father is smiling down on you." "I just know it," she replied. "You can bet I'll be watching every second." "When is it airing?" I gave her the date and channel, knowing she'd spread the word around the neighborhood too. Part of me hoped. No, I wanted it to get back to Mom that way. I certainly wasn't going to tell my mother myself. She had forfeited any claim to my life's milestones long ago. In the weeks leading up to the gala, I threw myself into preparation. The event organizers asked me to give a short acceptance speech. This would be my chance not only to thank those who truly helped me, but to stand there as living proof that I had made it on my own. I spent nights drafting and practicing a speech that was equal parts gracious and subtly defiant. I planned to dedicate my award to my father, who I knew was proud of me, and to the mentors who had supported me. I would make no mention of my mother. Her absence would ring louder than any words of condemnation. I also indulged in a small personal revenge. I splurged on a sleek, tailor-made gown in midnight blue that made me feel like royalty. I thought of all those dresses Mom once bought for Janie, all those salon trips they shared. And here I was, treating myself to the kind of experience they never offered me. The awards gala was held in a grand ballroom of a downtown hotel in New York City. I arrived solo by choice. Many honorees brought spouses or family as guests, but when the organizers asked me who would accompany me, I simply answered, No one thank you. I walked the red carpet alone, camera flashes capturing my proud smile. Inside, beneath the crystal chandeliers and swirling spotlights, I mingled with titans of industry and rising stars. Perhaps no one there knew the personal victory behind my composed demeanor, but I did. By the time I took my seat at the banquet table reserved for award recipients, my heart was thundering with anticipation. A production crew bustled about, readying the stage for the live broadcast. I knew Mrs. Conway was at home, likely throwing a one-woman watch party in front of her TV. I imagined her clapping as soon as my face appeared on screen, and somewhere across the country, my mother, if she had heard the news, might be watching too, perhaps out of curiosity or stunned pride or something in between. I didn't know for sure if she even cared enough to tune in, but I suspected that nosy neighbors and her own curiosity would get the better of her. The lights dimmed, and the ceremony began. Dignitaries spoke, awards were handed out one by one, and then, at last, it was my turn. The host announced my name, and as I rose and glided toward the stage, I felt a calm steal over me. This was different from the trembling little girl on a school stage long ago. I walked with confidence. This moment was mine, and I intended to savor every second. Standing at the podium under the bright stage lights, I looked out over the applauding audience. The camera's red light winked at me from the middle aisle, indicating that we were live on air. I took a slow breath and began my acceptance speech. The words flowed from my heart, honed by many late nights of practice. I am deeply honored, I said, voice clear and steady, and I have many people to thank for this award. First, I want to dedicate it to my father, who always believed in me. I know he's watching over me tonight. My eyes glistened as I continued, and to the mentors and friends who became my family when I needed one. You guided me, supported me, and never let me give up. This achievement is as much yours as it is mine. There was a round of warm applause. I allowed a small smile. I'd done it. I'd publicly acknowledged everyone who mattered, and conspicuously absent from that list was my mother. Thank you, I finished, and stepped back as the audience rose to its feet in a standing ovation. The last thing I saw before turning to leave the stage was a sea of smiling faces and clapping hands. Not a single empty seat in the house. After the ceremony, as I mingled at the reception, I felt my phone buzz in my evening clutch. Sneaking away from the chatter, I glanced at the screen, a text from Mrs. Conway. You were marvelous. I'm so proud of you. Your mom watched from my living room. She was very quiet when it ended. Call me tomorrow. Love you. I stared at the message, my heartbeat quickening. Mom had watched it, seeing everything. The award, my speech, the ovation, from Mrs. Conway's couch. I could only imagine how she reacted when she realized I hadn't mentioned her at all. Knowing Mom, that pointed omission must have stung. The next morning, I returned Mrs. Conway's call. She gently informed me that Mom had sat through the whole broadcast in silence, then gone home, looking shaken. Seeing you up there really hit her hard, she said. It should have felt purely satisfying, seeing her finally feel the weight of her absence, but my emotions were tangled. Part of me was glad she might finally taste a fraction of my old hurt. Yet another part of me, the child inside, still wondered, did she finally regret it? Did she care now? 2 days after the gala, I returned to my hometown. I wanted to visit Mrs. Conway in person and bring her a small thank you gift, a lovely silk scarf I'd picked out for her in New York. We were sitting on her porch swing, sipping iced tea in the warm afternoon sun, when I saw Mom's front door open across the street. Mom stepped onto her porch slowly, as if unsure why she'd come out at all. She looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow. We watched each other, uncertain, until I finally crossed the street toward my mother. I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, my heart pounding. Mom gripped the railing, eyes red and voice barely a whisper. Hi, she managed. I swallowed. Hi. She cleared her throat. Would you like to come in? I hesitated, then nodded and followed her inside. Inside, little had changed. The same family portraits dominated the walls, mostly of Janie and her milestones. On the mantel, I even saw Janie's wedding photo and a snapshot of her toddler son. This was the life Mom had been busy with, the one that hadn't included me. We stood awkwardly by the sofa. Mom cleared her throat. I saw your award ceremony, she began haltingly. I folded my arms, trying to keep my voice even. I heard. She winced and looked down at her hands. It was impressive. You were impressive. Thank you, I said. An awkward pause. This small talk felt absurd after everything, but I didn't intend to make it easy for her. Mom perched nervously on the edge of an armchair. I remained standing by the mantel, eyeing the family photos I had barely been part of. I owe you a congratulations, she said finally. And an apology? Her voice wavered. I said nothing, waiting. This was her show now. She pressed trembling fingers to her lips for a moment, gathering courage. I'm so sorry I wasn't there for any of it, she whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. Watching you on that stage, I realized how much I missed. How much I... Her voice broke, and a tear rolled down her cheek. I can't go back and fix it. I wish I could. I was a terrible mother to you. Hearing her actually apologize felt surreal. It didn't bring the triumph I once imagined. If anything, it felt sad. I swallowed the lump in my throat, remembering all the nights I had cried, wishing for this exact moment. Now that it was happening, I struggled to respond. You weren't there? I said quietly, my tone firm, but not cruel. You were never there, Mom. Not at my plays, or my games, or my awards. You left me to grow up feeling like I didn't matter. My eyes burned, but I held her gaze. This was the truth I needed to speak. Do you have any idea what that did to me? She shut her eyes, tears slipping down. I have no excuse, she whispered. I always told myself you were so strong, that you didn't need me and that Janie did. She buried her face in her hands. The old anger flared, and I allowed it into my voice. I was a child. I shouldn't have had to be that strong on my own. Mom sobbed softly into her palms. It was a raw, desolate sound. Part of me observed from afar, me standing tall and composed, her crumpled and weeping. The tables had truly turned. After a moment, she wiped her eyes and looked up at me. I know I don't deserve it, but I hope someday you can forgive me, she pleaded. I am so very proud of you, she continued. I'm sorry I never told you that when it mattered. There it was. The validation I had chased my whole life offered at last in this living room where I had once yearned for it. I felt a strange mix of relief, sorrow, and yes, a sense of justice. My silence made Mom fidget, clearly unsure if words could ever be enough. I survived, I said at last, my voice gentle but unwavering. I made a life for myself without you. I'm happy I did. It's just sad that it had to be that way. Mom nodded, face crumpling again. It is, she whispered. It's my loss, and it's my fault. Her admission hung in the air. For so long I had secretly wondered if I was somehow unlovable. Hearing her take the blame eased something in me. I just felt free. I turned and walked toward the door, feeling an immense weight lifting from my shoulders with each step. Mom stood quickly, anxious. Are you leaving? Please, don't be a stranger. I'd love a chance to know you again. To make it up to you, even a little. I paused in the doorway and looked back at her, clutching her own arms as if bracing herself. I chose my words carefully. I can't promise anything, I said at last, but thank you for saying that. It needed to be said. She gave a shaky nod, understanding. Without another word, I stepped back out into the daylight. The door closed softly behind me like the final line of a long, unfinished chapter. In the weeks and months after that day, the dust slowly settled. I returned to my life in the city, and Mom remained in our hometown, but something had undeniably shifted. The long, cold silence between us had been broken, not completely healed, but cracked open enough for light to start creeping in. For Mom, the consequences of our confrontation were heavy, but just. The neighborhood, it turned out, had learned about my award. Mrs. Conway, proud as ever, made sure everyone knew her girl next door had made good. Neighbors congratulated Mom in passing, but there was an undercurrent to it, a subtle question in their eyes. Why weren't you there to support your daughter? Mom had no easy answers. For the first time, she tasted a bit of the judgment and isolation I had felt growing up. It wasn't spite on my part or the neighbors, it was simply the truth surfacing. She had to face it. According to Mrs. Conway, who filled me in during our regular phone calls, Mom reacted to this new reality by retreating at first. She kept a low profile for a while, as if ashamed. But slowly, she began to speak of me differently. One afternoon, Mrs. Conway reported with a chuckle that Mom had shown off a newspaper clipping about my award to the ladies at church, her voice full of genuine admiration. It was a small thing, but significant. The woman who once never mentioned my achievements was finally proud to share them, even if belatedly. As for me, I found an unexpected peace after releasing all that pent-up pain. In the days after our talk, I realized I was no longer checking my phone, hoping for an apology that would never come. It had come. I was no longer bristling with resentment each time I reminisced about my childhood. I had said my piece. I slept better at night. My success was still mine alone, but now the triumph wasn't shadowed by bitterness. I had won in every sense that mattered. Mom did try in her own tentative ways to open the door to a new relationship. She sent me a long letter a month after my visit, the first real letter I'd ever received from her. In it, she reiterated her apology and told me more about her own upbringing, something she'd never discussed with me before. I learned that her parents, my grandparents, had been cold and distant with her, that she'd never felt good enough in her father's eyes. It didn't excuse how she treated me, but it did cast her in a more human light. She wrote that watching me achieve what I did made her both proud and painfully aware of her failures. She admitted that she had been cowardly. It was easier to invest in Janie's more outward neediness than to face the fact that she didn't know how to mother a child as independent as me. Reading those words, I felt a pang of empathy alongside my lingering hurt. I wrote back to her. It took me a few weeks to find the right words, but I did. I told her I appreciated her letter and that I forgave her. Not absolution for the past, but an acknowledgement that I was ready to set down the burden of anger. I explained that forgiveness for me was less about erasing what happened and more about choosing not to let it control my future. I didn't gush with affection, but I was honest and civil. It was the start of a tentative correspondence between us. Justice, I realized, didn't have to mean continuing the cycle of pain. The justice was in her finally understanding what she had done, and in me finally being heard. The consequence was that our relationship could never go back to what it might have been. It would forever carry the cracks and scars of the past. But those very cracks also let through a glimmer of something new. Over time, Mom and I established a fragile new normal. We spoke on the phone occasionally, short, careful conversations about my work, or her telling me how my nephew was doing. She never again missed an opportunity to congratulate me on anything, no matter how small. If I published an article or even mentioned a project I was excited about, she'd send a card or an email brimming with praise. It felt foreign and sometimes too late, but I accepted it for what it was, her earnest effort to be better, even at this late stage. I would be lying if I said everything was magically fixed. It wasn't. There were times we'd be talking and she'd mention some big memory with Janie and then fall silent, realizing anew that I hadn't been a part of it, that she hadn't let me be. In those silences, I could sense her regret heavy in the air. I didn't rush to fill them. Some things should sting. That's how we remember not to repeat our mistakes. Janie, for her part, was surprised by the changes. She called me one afternoon not long after Mom and I began writing and admitted she'd had no idea how I felt growing up. Mom's guilt had apparently spilled over to her. One day, Mom tearfully confessed to Janie that she feared she'd ruined her relationship with me. My sister sounded contrite as well. She apologized for her obliviousness and for any part she played in our family dynamic. It was an unexpected conversation, but a healing one. I told Janie that I didn't begrudge her the love she got. I only ever wanted a share of it. We ended the call on gentle terms, promising to keep in touch. The ripples of truth spread through our family, and while they caused some pain, they also prompted growth. Mom's relationship with Janie and her grandson remained close, but I noticed from the stories I heard that she was careful not to repeat the same patterns with them. She would gush about both her daughters now if someone asked, making sure to include my latest news alongside Janie's. In a way, my mother's belated change of heart became part of her penance. She would spend the rest of her days trying to be the mother and grandmother she hadn't been before. As for me, I moved forward and let my successes be their own reward. I continued to achieve in my career, collected more accolades, even mentored young people who reminded me of myself. In doing so, I found a sense of closure. I could be for others what I wished someone had been for me, and that felt like justice too, the kind that breaks a cycle. The outcome of my story wasn't a perfect happy ending, but it was a just one. My mother and I never became as close as some mothers and daughters are. Too much water under that bridge. But we did find a cordial, honest middle ground. She had to live with the knowledge that she'd failed me and bear the work of making amends, and I had the satisfaction of knowing I rose above what happened. In the end, that was enough. Looking back on everything now, I can hardly believe how far I've come. The little girl who once begged silently for her mother's love grew into a woman who learned to love herself and demand the respect she deserved. My story is one of quiet resilience and eventual justice. I think back to all those times my mom ignored my accomplishments, all the spelling bees, recitals, graduations, while shedding tears over something as trivial as my sister's broken nail. The irony isn't lost on me. For years, that memory fueled my anger. But in the end, life brought a reversal. I never anticipated my mother did finally cry over me, not out of pity or joy, at some event I invited her to, but out of regret as she watched me succeed from afar. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that carrying the weight of pain from the past can only ever slow you down. I carried that weight for years, through lonely school nights and triumphant moments witnessed only by empty chairs. But in releasing it, in confronting the source of that pain, I found freedom. Speaking my truth to my mother, hearing her apology, and allowing myself to forgive, in my own way on my own terms, was the closure I didn't realize I needed. It hasn't been perfect, and it hasn't erased the past, but it has allowed me to finally move forward without the old ghosts haunting me at every step. I also learned that justice isn't about revenge or making someone hurt the way you hurt. True justice in my case was breaking a cycle, ensuring that neglect didn't continue to define relationships in our family. In confronting my mother, I forced her to see me for who I am and what she'd done. In forgiving her, I set myself free from becoming bitter and cruel in return. Now, she has to live with the knowledge of what she lost and work to be better with the time she has left. And I get to live my life without waiting for anyone's validation but my own. To anyone out there who feels invisible or less than because someone important failed to see your worth, you are not alone and you are not the problem. I spent so many years thinking I wasn't enough, not loud enough, not talented enough, not something enough to win my mother's love. But the truth is, her inability to love me the way I deserved was her failing, not mine. If I could go back and tell my younger self one thing, it would be that you are enough as you are. And one day you will surround yourself with people who see that. Sharing this story hasn't been easy, but I hope it resonates with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the people who should love us most are the ones who hurt us deepest. It's a unique kind of pain, but it doesn't have to define your whole life. We can find family in others, in friends, neighbors, mentors, and we can rise above what was done to us. In my case, that neighbor, Mrs. Conway, became like family to me. Her unwavering support was a beacon through the darkest times. And if the opportunity comes to speak your truth, I encourage you to take it, even if your voice shakes. It might just set you free, as it did for me. My journey isn't over, but I'm stepping into the future without the old chains of longing and anger. Shortly after the gala, I visited my father's grave on a quiet morning. I laid a copy of the award announcement program by his headstone and whispered, "We did it." I felt his presence there, the same steady love I'd always imagined, and I knew somewhere he was proud. A wave of both sorrow and gratitude washed over me at that moment. Sorrow that he couldn't be here in person, but gratitude that his belief in me had carried me so far. It struck me then that in a way I had been carrying both our dreams forward, and I had fulfilled them. Someday, if I have a child of my own, I will make sure they never doubt for a second how loved and celebrated they are. I know exactly the kind of mother I will strive to be, one who never lets her child feel invisible, because I understand the cost of that pain, and that to me is justice enough. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever experienced something similar, a family member who didn't appreciate you, or a situation where you had to find closure on your own, I invite you to share your thoughts or your own story in the comments. What do you think of my decision to confront and forgive my mother? Would you have done the same in my shoes or handled it differently? If you have advice or your own story of family favoritism or forgiveness, I'd love to read it. I'll be checking the comments, and I believe others will find strength in hearing your experiences too. And if my story touched you, please consider sharing it with someone who might need a little hope today. Remember, your story matters, and your voice deserves to be heard. In the end, life has a way of balancing the scales. I didn't get the mother I deserved, but I got something else. I got me. I found my inner strength, my voice, and my worth. If I ever have a child of my own someday, I know I'll be the kind of mother who shows up and makes sure they never feel invisible. Because I understand the cost of that pain. And that, to me, is justice enough.